Mark Rogers TV back with you as we continue our previews of a number of bowl games across America, 39 of them in all, as the number seems to increase every year. We've got three in particular we want to focus on with Mr. Paul Crane, currently the sports director at KTBS of Shreveport, Louisiana, also doing some work with the New Orleans Saints, traveling up to Chicago. We catch him in an airport as he's going up to cover the Saints in the Bears Monday night game, and also Paul, of course, formerly of CNN. Hey, Paul, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate the time here.
Well, Mark, appreciate it very much. Thank you.
So you're very involved with the LSU football program. It's a rabid fan base. You need to be on top of this team and on top of the goings about of LSU football. So let's start there with the Tigers taking on Notre Dame. Both teams with a bit of a down year. In particular, but when it comes to brand names, it doesn't get a whole lot better than LSU and Notre Dame going at it in the Music City Bowl. So my question for you to get us started on LSU is, on the surface, 8-4 this year, coming off, I believe, a 10-3 season last year. So losing more early enrollees to the NFL draft than anybody in the country. Are LSU fans satisfied, understanding that the losses have been prominent? Or is this a disappointment what the program has failed to achieve the last 2 years?
Well, Mark, I think understanding and satisfied are mutually exclusive when it comes to the LSU fan base. I think they understand because, as you referenced, the Tigers have lost so much talent to the NFL, especially underclassmen, many of which were going to be gone for another year. And to replenish that, the team played 17 true freshmen this year. And I think on the offensive side of the ball in particular, they were never able to get going at the quarterback position. So I think Tiger faithful understand why it was an 8-4 season, but I don't think they're ever satisfied with something like that. The offensive, shall we say, lack of creativity went very basic. And they've got very strong running backs, but it really took a while to get things going. And even on the defensive side, so many new faces, so many young, inexperienced players in roles that Les Miles and defensive coordinator John Chavis really were counting on. It took a while to get going, but I think they figured it out, at least in terms of that conservative offense, run, because Anthony Jennings, the redshirt sophomore, really did struggle most of the year, and Brandon Harris, the true freshman who has a world of talent, just was never able to really grasp the extensive Cam Cameron playbook to the point where he could be an effective player. So they decided to run, and use that strong offensive line and try to beat down other teams, wear them down, especially up front. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
Paul, I think you answered my next question because it's centered around the quarterback position, and at least my perspective, that Jennings had the nod going into 2014 because he led the game-winning drive against Arkansas. He played the bowl game against Iowa. Harris, the upside more to a large extent, has the high ceiling, but Jennings had the experience going into this season and got the nod. But, some of the anemic passing performances out of this football team against the likes of Auburn mid-season, blowing out LSU on the Plains. So we see the two NFL receivers leave in Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. We see the lack of quarterback play. So it's difficult to evaluate the wide receivers, but is this group as talented as what we've seen in the past at LSU?
I would say it is, and again, we just haven't seen it, as you mentioned. They have a true freshman named Malachi Dupree, who looks like his ceiling is through the roof. They have a true freshman, Trey Quinn, who is a good-looking possession-type receiver, a slot guy. They have a sophomore in John Diarse, who made some great catches. And they've got a big play guy in Traven Doral, who caught that pass from Anthony Jennings in that season finale win when he came off the bench a year ago when Zach Mettenberger got hurt against Arkansas to win the game. And you take a look at the numbers that Traven Doral was able to put up this year, really remarkable considering the lack of quarterback play. And I think the talent's there. For me, I've been somewhat critical. This coaching staff is obviously done some great things, but Anthony Jennings clearly doesn't have the skill set of a strong passing game. He had the experience and was able to not be the deer in headlights and was able to keep them out of big trouble, but he was not able to make good throws. And Brandon Harris, well, he's got this incredible skill set. I think I mentioned that he wasn't able to really grab Cam Cameron's playbook, which is like 300 plays strong. I'm a little surprised that this staff, knowing that in spring they knew they were going to have inexperience at quarterback. Brandon Harris graduated high school early in Bossier City, Louisiana, was there for spring practice, and they never essentially dumbed down the playbook for him so that he was able to at least have a package of plays that he could handle, considering how tough it is to come in as a true freshman and play that position in particular in the SEC. I've kind of likened it to they have made it a mandate that he needs to speak fluent Mandarin Chinese before he can play, as opposed to dumbing it down and letting him speak broken Spanish to get out there and do something. And if I would think if I gave the coaching staff a shot at truth serum, I think they'd say if they could go back and do it over again, they might do it a little differently, but we're way too late for that. I don't know what we'll see from Brandon Harris in the bowl game. I know Coach Miles has referenced many times during the course of the year he wanted to get him in there, but I do believe Coach Miles has kind of kept him from getting on the field because I think if Cam Cameron had his way, Brandon Harris would be out there more. And that you referenced that Auburn game, which was a complete disaster. That was the only game Brandon Harris started, but it was also the only game that Brandon Harris took any first quarter snaps. When they brought him along, they had 3 non-conference games that were, by their standards, pretty simple. And they could have brought him along and given him some first quarter snaps. They never did. So the first time he ever looked across the line of scrimmage at a defense that was trying to fool him and come after him was in that game at Auburn, and obviously it didn't work out very well.
Paul, I'm really surprised to hear that, because if there's a team that is known for lining it up and playing simple football, that our talent's better than yours and we're going to impose our will, it's LSU. So I'm surprised that they would try to cram so much down the kid's throat to try to execute the offense.
Well, I think that's why we haven't seen him. I think that's why we haven't seen him. So you're right, which is why they took those stable of running backs. They've got 4 extremely talented running backs and an outstanding offensive line. So that's the way they came back in the opener against Wisconsin. They beat Wisconsin down, and for some unknown reason, the Badgers went away from Melvin Gordon and ended up losing the game. But that's the way they beat Ole Miss in a 10-7 game. That, you know, when they were competitive, it was low scoring, and they would just kind of impose their will, but their will was never really able to include any good deep passes over the top, even though Anthony Jennings was able to hit Traven Durrell a few times over the course of the season on a consistent basis. It just never happened.
Maybe this is being a little bit simplistic, but the scores would indicate, and based on the games that I saw, which is about 5, I saw the big games, is that the defense really improved. I don't think there was any question about the athleticism and speed and talent, but again, it was all the losses to the NFL. So the disaster we saw at Auburn, which was amplified by all the 3-and-outs from the offense, later in the season we're seeing a defense that really put the hammer down on a team like an Alabama. Really, they outplayed Alabama in Death Valley, should have won that game, and of course you mentioned beating Ole Miss and holding the Rebels to 7 points. So this defense is probably one of the 10 best defenses in the country.
I wouldn't argue against that. It has grown. It's much better than it was opening day. It's really come along, and I would expect them, especially with the problems that Everett Golson has had recently with the football, he's going to have his hands full in the bowl game. I don't think there's any question about that.
Most of us got a chance to see Notre Dame against Florida State, and at that point we thought Notre Dame was pretty good. Then after they almost beat Notre Dame, or almost beat Florida State, and depending on your viewpoint of the last call in the game, could have beaten Florida State rather easily on the road. We thought this was a contending football team, and then they completely fell apart. So LSU a pretty substantial favorite at this point. Any worries among the Tiger faithful in playing Notre Dame?
Well, I think they're thrilled to play Notre Dame, and I think the Tiger faithful likes to think back to that Sugar Bowl game a few years ago when LSU absolutely undressed Notre Dame in the Superdome. So I think they'll be the Tiger faithful will be anticipating something like that, and I think LSU probably should be a favorite because I think that it's hard to tell is Notre Dame got the kind of talent to compete with a team that is trying to win a second consecutive national championship, or is the committee correct in keeping Florida State in the top 4 because they are the reigning national champions and have been undefeated once again, but aren't necessarily that impressive and maybe aren't that good. So was that game a reflection of Florida State not necessarily being that good, or Notre Dame having a flash of a good game? I'm not sure that we know.
I don't think we do know, but any decent opponent Notre Dame faced down the stretch, including that finale against USC, they, to use your word, got undressed. 49-14 is pretty ugly, and unless they really take care of the football better than they did over the course of the season, with Everett Golson throwing picks and letting the handle on the ball go, we could see something close to what Brady Quinn saw at the Superdome in 2006. All right, so let's talk about this Arkansas-Texas matchup, because there are certain bowl games that we see with brand-name big-time football powers. They get together after a 6-6 season, and they just don't want to be there. This is a different situation. Arkansas coming off, of course, the 13-game losing streak, and then to see a team defeat. It's one thing to break a losing streak. It's another thing to go out against 2 quality opponents and shut them out back-to-back, and then even finish out with a quality loss, if there is such a thing, against Missouri. So your thoughts about this Arkansas football team and the Hogs' improvement over the past year?
I think Brett Bielema has done an outstanding job, and you talk about a team that's trending upward. The Arkansas Razorbacks would be one of those teams. They're another one that will kind of try to take your will away. They rely on the run, and Brandon Allen has been adequate, but not much better than adequate at quarterback. But they've got some of the best running backs in the country, a strong offensive line. And remember, Brett Bielema is one of those, and he's recruiting this way also. Offensive linemen can be stars at Arkansas. And remember, they had one of their linemen throw a touchdown pass, line up at quarterback and actually throw a touchdown pass this year. And this is an important game, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Mark, with referencing these 2 teams. The records may not be that impressive, but they're very happy to be in the bowl game, and I think happy to be against each other because this is an old Southwest Conference rivalry. Arkansas, with its close, remember, they played Alabama extremely tough. A missed extra point and a missed field goal was a difference in a 14-13 loss. They came that close to beating Alabama in the regular season. They had a big lead get away against Texas A&M earlier in the season when we thought the Aggies were better than they ended up being, and ended up losing in overtime. So this team was knocking at the door for a long time to get its first SEC win, and as you mentioned, back-to-back shutout wins against 2 pretty good teams in LSU and Ole Miss. That's pretty impressive. And Texas, of course, looked like it was going to, with all the players that Charlie Strong kicked off the team and the struggles they went through and some of the injuries, and then to come back, it looked like they were not going to be bowl eligible, but to come back with the wins they had against West Virginia and Oklahoma State in particular, and they obviously played much better down the stretch except for that TCU game at the end of the season. It could end up being a very entertaining game. I think it's an important game for both of these teams, not just in terms of making sure they leave their season with a winning record, but in recruiting. I don't think it can be overstated how important this is for Tex to finish on the upside and make sure it continues to do better than it's been doing with Texas A&M in particular in-state. And does Arkansas need to have Texas kids come into its program. So this is a great opportunity for the Razorbacks as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a state that to keep up in the SEC Western Division has to go outside the state, doesn't have the type recruiting base right there to compete. Paul Crane joins us from KTBS in Shreveport, Louisiana. At this time last year, Paul, I would have told you that Arkansas needed to find themselves a quarterback because Brandon Allen was coming off a pretty marginal season in 2013. I think the numbers didn't even justify that. If you take away the cupcake opponents, he really struggled against the quality teams in the SEC. He's turned it around. Of course, it's always going to be a run-first system at Arkansas. So he goes into his senior season, and he seems to have solidified himself as the starter.
Well, I think, a quarterback's best friend is a strong running game, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a stable of running backs that are better than the guys that Brett Bielema has put behind Brandon Allen. He's also got some talent at wide receiver, I think, and even the true freshman Jared Cornelius, who I know a little bit of, having played at Evangel High School in Shreveport, he's had some big moments. So I think, again, they're coming along. They like to pound the football, and obviously, as we've referenced with those shutouts, their defense, I think, doesn't get the kind of credit it should. And when you take a look, again, at Arkansas, you talk about running the gauntlet. In the SEC West, every single SEC team, all 8 of their conference games this year were against top 20 teams, and they had 5 in a row against teams ranked in the top 10. That's remarkable when you think about it. When Ohio State, for example, had to get to the Big Ten championship team just to play a third-ranked team all season.
Yeah, Arkansas, again, it was, and I have no attachment, but to see a team knocking at the door, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, week after week, and having to play that type of schedule, move them to the Big 12 or take your pick of conferences and divisions, and you would think that they would have racked up a few wins, and now it's finally paying off. I don't know where the
They never quit. They never quit those heartbreaking losses. They never quit, which I think says a lot about that team as well and the coaching staff, because they let that big lead and lost in overtime against Texas A&M. They lost again, like I said, with a missed extra point, a missed chip shot field goal against Alabama. The wheels could have come off for that program. Instead, they really buckled up and had those back-to-back shutouts to get their first SEC wins under Brett Bielema.
Yeah, and you talked about how good the defense has been. This is something I didn't expect. I've got an Arkansas guy that comes on from time to time, and the front 4 was really good last year. The back 7 had some issues, and then they come into this season, and in addition to the 2 shutouts, they go to Starkville, only give up 17 points. You mentioned the Alabama effort. All those are very low-scoring games against quality competition, so they've pretty much played a strong season from start to finish on defense. Good things happening there. What is the pulse on the Brett Bielema satisfaction meter? It has to have swung quite a bit just in the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Well, they finally breaking through. I think the Arkansas faithful realized that they were in the right direction. And when you think of the disaster that Brett Bielema inherited after the Bobby Petrino mess and the John L. Smith, whatever that was, the fact that it's taken some time, I think everyone expected it to take some time, but we've watched them, again, play so much better and get so close. I think there has been patience, and I think we're going to see Razorback Nation show up in force in Houston for this game, because they've traditionally traveled very well. And as you referenced, the fact that the record may not be big, but they are very excited to be bowl eligible, be in a bowl game, and to have it come against the University of Texas. I think it all adds up very well. I expect Houston to have its fair share of red on hand the week of the bowl game, because the Razorbacks are going to, their fans are going to travel for this game.
Yeah, the last time the Hogs stepped on a field in postseason play, it was against Ohio State in the Sugar Bowl, and they were a top 10 team, and more has happened to this program possibly than any program in America since then, with Petrino and John L. Smith and now Brett Bielema, and hopefully things are headed in the right direction. So again, that's Arkansas, Texas in the Texas Bowl in Houston on December 29th. All right, Paul, before we let you go, we want to get your thoughts on the Liberty Bowl. We've got Texas A&M taking on West Virginia. The Mountaineers had a nice little bounce-back season in the Big 12. Texas A&M, big recruiting classes, still very young team, still pretty bad defense. Your thoughts about the Aggies and what has gone from a Kenny Hill show now to a Kyle Allen show late in the season?
Well, of course, Kyle Allen, that big 5-star recruit, and the fact that Kenny Hill won the job and then opened the season. Remember, at South Carolina, they dominated the Gamecocks, and at that time, we were all expecting South Carolina to be extremely competitive, not just in the SEC East, but for the SEC championship. and maybe even more. Who knows? And I think it ended up neither team was as good as we thought they were going to be. Obviously, A&M had its issues over the course of the year. Clearly, Kenny Hill had also fell out of favor for a number of reasons with Kevin Sumlin. And now that Kyle Allen's had his opportunities, this was another team that lost a substantial amount of talent, and it goes way beyond Johnny Manziel. You know, when you look at Mike Evans and you look at Jake Matthews on the offensive line, I'm not sure people realize how much they lost, but they've recruited extremely well. But Kevin Sumlin still has some work to do, and all of a sudden the resurgence of Texas in those recruiting battles, it's not as one-sided as it looked like it was going to be. So I think this becomes a very important game for A&M for many reasons, from recruiting to also getting its swagger back and to let them go into the off-season on a high note, because they certainly had down times after you consider what the expectations were after that opening day win in Columbia, South Carolina.
Kevin Sumlin's brought in great recruiting classes, have been ranked extremely high. He's an offensive guru. I'm not completely sold. I haven't completely given him a pass in regards to building the program and winning big games. That has yet to happen. Of course, he had Johnny Manziel for 2 years, so they outscored everybody, and then they had a bit of a drop-off this season, which was somewhat expected. Again, the recruiting rankings tell us that at some point the defense is going to get better, but that has yet to manifest itself on the field. So Kevin Sumlin, big-name coach, certainly earns the big salary, but again, I'm going to have to wait and see Texas A&M actually prove it on the field against the powers in the SEC West myself.
And right now, as we talk, they don't even have a defensive coordinator. Kevin Sumlin fired Mark Snyder at the end of the regular season, and there are a number of, you talk about the recruits, they've been recruiting defense heavily this year, but a number of those recruits are now taking a wait-and-see attitude because they don't know who the coordinator is, and of course they had such defensive issues through the course of the season. So it'll be interesting to see how many of the commits go ahead and sign. And of course, there are a number of kids, as always, that are loyal to the program, and it doesn't matter who the coordinator is going to be. But there are a number of others that are kind of wait and see. And when you have right down the road Charlie Strong being such a strong defensive coach, in particular, it's going to be interesting to see what happens as we move towards signing day. But again, I think this bowl game becomes very important for Kevin Sumlin and the Aggies.
Paul, when I play my confidence pool here in a couple days leading into Saturday's first bowl game, I think I'm going to have to go single digits on this one. Is this one as much of a toss-up to you as it is to Vegas and myself, West Virginia, Texas A&M?
I think so, because obviously we know West Virginia can score. So with all the things we just talked about with the defensive issues on the Aggies, I wouldn't be surprised if it was close, but I think I would be surprised if the Aggies and Kevin Sumlin didn't figure out a way to get this done. So it's always hard to say, especially when you get to bowl games where you're not quite sure how teams are coming in, but I think we're looking at teams here, unlike, say, something like we've seen where, take Alabama when it lost a year ago to Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl. Clearly Alabama was disappointed in not playing for a national championship. I don't think that's what we're going to be dealing with here, because the disappointment for each of these teams happened during the course of the season, and they know how important this final game is, as opposed to the disappointment coming at the end of the year, winding up where they are. So I kind of think that's the way this one's going to go, but I do think it's going to be high scoring.
And with the SEC winning, I don't know, I don't have the verification of it, but I think if we added up through the years, the last 5 or 10, 70 or 75% of its bowl games, I basically have to see evidence that they're not going to win that particular bowl game for me to be sold that anyone's going to knock off the SEC in any particular bowl matchup. Hey, Paul, before we let you go, I think you're in an interesting place there in Shreveport, Louisiana, just when we look at Southern football, when we look at the region around you and the Power 5 structure there. So you've got LSU. You're not that far away from Mississippi. I'm thinking there's not a ton of influence, but still, you got Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and to a much lesser degree, Southern Miss. You got Arkansas, as we mentioned before we came on the air here. You talked about the Arkansas flavor, and then you got Texas and Texas A&M. So it's some pretty rich football soil down there.
Well, right up in the northwest corner of the state of Louisiana, they call that area the Ark-La-Tex because it's right in the corner of Arkansas and Louisiana and Texas. And Dak Prescott, for example, comes from Houghton, Louisiana, which is right there as a suburb of Shreveport. So there are a lot of followers of Mississippi State now just because of him. And you're right, we have a lot of high school football is really quite incredible in the area. And Louisiana Tech is right there as well, which obviously is in a tough spot in the heart of the SEC to recruit. But Skip Holtz has done a pretty good job, all things considered there. And it really is the three most important sports, Mark, are football, spring football, and recruiting. That's it.
I didn't expect anything less than that. I worked for 6 years in Mississippi. And I remember a high school coach once responding to the sports director at the station I was working at when he was asked, "Why are you wearing a tie, coach? It's a Friday night football game." And the coach said, "Boy, you're in the South. You dress up for two things, church and football." That was the response.
I had Tom Landry School, who I spent so much time with during my time in Dallas. But it is high school football. I host every Friday night an hour-long high school football show. It's the only place I've ever been that does an hour, and it's right in the heart of when the games are ending. Not way late at night after everything's long since over. From 10:30 to 11:30 Central Time, we go for an hour, and it's quite something. So people take it very seriously, and they should, because, like I said, the three most important things are football, spring football, and recruiting. So it's a 12-month-a-year event, and I'm glad it is. Heck, if it wasn't, I'd have to find a real job.
That's right, you and me. It's funny, I can relate to that because I did a Friday night football show at the end of the newscast as well in Mississippi, and they didn't care how long it was for a CBS affiliate. Letterman was on right after us. They did not care how far I bled into Letterman. It hit me at some point that I wasn't producing my shows that tightly, was wondering why I wasn't getting any kind of cues from the director, and that they just didn't care if I went 10 or 15 minutes heavy, and they would catch Letterman whenever they got to him.
Well, I can relate to that, but we've got a full hour from 10:30 to 11:30 every Friday night, and we're only 1 week out of the last full hour show. We even went into the state playoffs, and again, the playoff, we follow all of that. Arkansas just ended up this last week. Louisiana just ended up this last week. But we have two teams from East Texas that we follow that have made it to the Cowboys Stadium in Arlington coming up this week, so we'll be out there for that. We won't be doing an hour show, but high school hasn't even finished yet in the state of Texas.
Ark-La-Tex, I'm going to add that to the vocabulary. Paul Crane joins us from KTBS out of Shreveport. He's on his way to the Saints-Bears game, and was kind enough to fill up his time at the airport by talking some Arkansas, also Texas A&M and LSU bowl games coming up in just a few weeks. Paul, thanks so much for your information and insight. I was glad that we could catch up with you.
Mark, thanks for having me. I look forward to doing it again sometime.